Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Bay, KSQD's local public affairs show, brought to you every weekday evening at 5 o'clock right here on KSQD 90.7 FM. I'm your host, Rachel Ann Goodman, and it's great to be here with you this evening to talk about something that may have fallen off the straight headlines and the top news stories, but still is front and center for a lot of people in this world. And that is the protest in Iran. Some call it a revolution. And it's historic. It's being led by children and young women. Here to talk about what that looks like from the diaspora perspective, people who have left Iran and have been looking at it from here in Santa Cruz County, we talked to two women who are activists and closely watching what is happening in their home country. The first of those that we'll talk to tonight is Elnaz Sarbar. She's an activist and mother of a tiny baby. She's also one of my students, and that's how we met. And later on in the program, we'll visit with Erika Abrahamian, who has been in this country since she was 16 and is watching also very closely what's happening in Iran. How do local activists do what they do and stay involved when they live thousands of miles away? That is the question we begin with. And welcome to Elnaz. Thank you for being here tonight on Talk of the Bay.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me.
So we'll start with your story. People leave their home countries for many different reasons. How long did you live in Iran before you left?
I was born and raised in Iran. I went to university in Iran. I founded a little company. And by the time I was able to leave, I was 20 years old. That is not to say I didn't want to leave earlier. When I was in high school, when I was a teenager, I realized this is such a harsh place for women to live. I felt second-class citizen, and I really wanted to leave the country. What really made me make that decision was one day I was thinking that, I never want to have a child there. I never want to bring another person, especially a woman, into this country, in this environment. And that prompted me to make a decision. I learned English. I watched a lot of Hollywood movies to learn English. And eventually I left the country for California in 2008.
What were some of the restrictions you grew up under as a woman, as a young girl?
The most prevalent one, the one that's very obvious to you, is covering your hair. And that starts when you're 7 years old, as soon as you go to school. And I noticed this really fast because I have a brother that's only 1 year younger than I am. And we grew up together, we played together, we did everything together. And then at some point, I started to notice all these differences I had to cover my hair because I was a girl. I was not allowed to ride bicycle because I was a girl. I was not allowed to sing in public. I was not allowed to dance in public. And these are like very day-to-day things that I experienced. And there's more to that in terms of women's rights, right? Women are not allowed to leave the country without the permission of their husbands. We are not a guardian of our children. Like you can't go to the bank and open a bank account for your child because you are not the guardian of your children, and your testimony worth half of a testimony of a man. So like they kind of compile on top of each other. But as a child, when I went to school, I had to put on a uniform that covered my hair, and there was no escape from it. If you didn't wear it, there was no education, no jobs, no presence in public.
What was your sense of the consequences of breaking the rules from when you were a child? What did you feel? What was going to happen to you if you broke the rules?
Specifically the rule about the hijab, and people know more about it because of the incident of Mahsa Amini that kicked off this uprising, is you could get arrested, you could get fined for not covering your hair, and you could be lashed, I think 72 lashes, and also 2 to 60 days of prison. So the consequences are dire. It's not just like, I'm going to be fined, or I'm going to be like, get a suspension from school. No, you could be really in trouble for doing this. And I guess in case of Mahsa Amini, we saw something really, really harsh happen because the morality police, which is basically a kind of a daily patrol that goes around in public and look at women's clothing, has a permission to arrest women for this disobeying this law, and that could land you to death, as we saw. But what are you going to do? Like, can you refrain from not feeling the air in your hair? Can you refrain from not feeling the sun in your hair? And in like hot summer days, and I remember walking back with my friend from the school, and we were so hot, and we really wanted to take off our scarves, and we did whenever we could. I have been arrested before because I took my scarf off. We were this time I'm a student in a university. It's summer. We are taking a vacation with a bunch of friends. We go to south of the country, and we are in a beautiful nature, middle of nowhere, walking by the side of a road. It's 5 of us. I think it was 2 girls and 3 guys, and we took our scarves off. Very empty place. We're not in any public places. And then a car goes by. And 20 minutes later, a truck comes by, and there are people who tell us that we have broken the law, and we were walking with our hair not covered. And by the time this car is there, we realize what's happening. So we girls have covered our hair. And they come down and they look at us and it's like, we knew that you had your hair uncovered. And we are trying to like finagle at it. It's like, no, there's this guy with long hair. You might mistaken. And they're not budging. And they have guns. So there's no way for us to disobey this. So they put us on a truck, take to this Basiji base, which Basij is basically a paramilitary group in Iran. And they put us in a room and they lock us. And, we try to negotiate with them saying we are good students. We are here with permission of parents, blah, blah, blah. And eventually they say, okay, you have to sign a written statement that you never do this. And we let you go. And we had tickets for train to leave their hometown. So they're like, okay, out with you guys. So they let us go. But it could end in more consequences. In 2019, there was 3 activists basically, who went to the Tehran subway, and they gave flowers to other women. They did it on March 8th, on the Women's Day, and saying, well, we don't want to wear hijab, and we respect other people who want to wear hijab. And they actually gave flowers to other women who were wearing hijab, hugging them, saying, hey, it's March 8th. And these 3 women were arrested, and they got really, really harsh sentences. One of them was sentenced to 23 years, the other one for 16 years and 9 years.
For handing out flowers.
Yes.
On International Women's Day.
Yes. Unbelievable. But it kind of like maybe that's a testimony on how important this is for the Islamic Republic to control women through hijab, and how stubborn they are in terms of this is our red line. We are not going back. And if anybody tries to publicly, because that was a public action, to go against this and encourage other women to do the same, we're not going to tolerate this. And they handed harsh sentences. But I don't think that stopped Iranian women, as we saw.
Right. So I want to talk about that. There are a lot of media that are coming out of what's happening there now. If you just joined me, I'm speaking with Elnaz Sarbar. She is a recent immigrant in the past 15 years from Iran, yes, living here in Santa Cruz County. And you've gone back there several times.
Yeah.
Tell me about what that was like and when the last time you were there.
Yeah, I have family there. So when I was able to go back, I went back and I wanted to see how the country was changed and how I felt about it. And it was strange because after you end up living in a free country, then you go back and then you see stuff that you were not able to see and you were not used to see. But related to our topic, one of the times I went there back, I participated in a campaign against the compulsory hijab. This campaign is called White Wednesdays, and it was run by a journalist named Masih Ali-Najad, which she actually is in the U.S. She resides in New York right now. And her campaign was women who felt the same as I did. And they were like, if you don't want to wear hijab, go out in public, take a video of yourself, take a picture of yourself without the scarf, with your hair flowing, and publish it. And she published it on her platform. And when I went back to Iran in 2017, I took a 3-hour-long trip from one of my friend's house. I took the subway. And then I walked some of the way without my scarf, and I took video of it. And I was close to being arrested. About 100 feet away from my friend's house, very close to where I was going, I was spotted by an agent on a motorcycle. And I saw him looking at me in his mirror, and he was ahead of me in a one-way street, so he had to do some finagling in order to be able to come and catch me. And I pretended I did not see him. I was wearing sunglasses. And unfortunately, I was carrying my American passport at the time, too. And if they were arresting me, if they had arrested me, it would have been not only breaking the law, but also like, oh, you're a spy, or you've got money to do this, instead of that being my prerogative to do that. Anyway, so he had to go around to a different street to come around, and I was able to get away from his viewpoint, and then I started running. I ran for like maybe 20 meters, and I found a shop, and I just dashed inside and put my scarf and started talking with the shopkeeper about the rentals around the place. And eventually he left, and I took a breather, and I published a video I took from that day when I came out of the country to be able to be away from the consequences. But it felt very empowering to walk in the street that way. And, every day, every woman, when you want to go out of the home, you look at the mirror and you look, oh, I'm pretty, I look good, I look clean, I look nice. And in Iran, I used to look at the mirror, it's like, well, am I going to get away with whatever I'm wearing today, or am I going to be in trouble? And it felt good to be able to be myself in Iran. I'm just like, I don't want to wear this.
Wow. How scary. It's like listening to some sort of thriller movie, but it's real. It's what's happening right now on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
And you're bringing us these stories. There's a lot of videos coming out. And I was going to talk to you about the media aspect, because there's a tight control on official media and journalism coming out of Iran. I heard a really interesting story from a BBC reporter who interviewed Mahsa Amini's father, and her interview was surveilled and recorded, and then they edited it to make it sound like she was some sort of foreign agent.
Yeah.
And BBC is like the very respected journalism outlet, but the government was intentionally trying to smear not only her reputation as a journalist, pretending like she's some agent of the West, but her entire organization, the BBC. And she was talking about how, they were threatening to arrest her for a tape they had falsified, basically.
Yeah. They're trying to, so the uprising brought a lot of people in the street, especially, as you mentioned, the young generation. The average age of the protesters was 15 years old, which is very, very young. And it's going very strong. So one thing the government tried to do is changing the narrative and saying, these are not Iranian women who want the change. And these are the agents of the US and UK and Israel who want to destroy the Islamic Republic, instead of recognizing what's happening inside the country. And they really tried to control the media tightly. The internet is filtered. And since the beginning of the uprising, they tried to filter a lot of apps that people use to leak this video outside Iran. Like Instagram is now filtered, WhatsApp is filtered, Telegram. I was not able to send pictures of my daughter to my aunt because they're trying to control the videos that are coming out. And I am not surprised to see that narrative. And I think we Iranians are so used to seeing this. Like a lot of people who are arrested are under torture to confess against themselves. And then that goes onto state TV inside Iran, that testimony with people that might also have a bruise on their eyes. So you can actually know that this is not, who would testify against themselves. And so to change the narrative and try to just keep a face, which I don't think is working anymore.
I don't think people believe it. When, like you said, if you see someone in a forced confession looking like they've been tortured, it's hard to believe what you're seeing on the television, on state-sponsored Iranian television. You have some pieces of media you want to share. Tell me about this one from Shervin Hajipur. I'm probably mispronouncing his name. Baraye,
yeah. Yeah, it's a song. Baraye means for, and the song is called Baraye. It's talking about why, kind of like, why is this happening? Why are we doing this? Why are we in the streets? And it's a song that a lot of people in Iran identified with. And let's listen to it, and then I'll talk about it more.
You're listening to K-Squid, KSQD, Santa Cruz.
برای ترسیدن به وقت بوسیدن برای خواهرم خواهرت خواهرامون برای تغییر مغزها که پوسیدن برای شرمندگی برای بیپولی برای حسرت یک زندگی معمولی برای کودک زباله‌گرد و آرزوهاش برای این اقتصاد دستوری برای این هوای آلوده برای ولیعصر و درختای فرسوده برای پیروز و احتمال انقراضش برای سگهای بیگناه ممنوعه برای گریه های بیوقفه برای تصویر تکرار این لحظه برای چهره ای که میخنده برای دانش آموزا برای آینده برای بهشت اجباری برای نخبه های زندانی برای کودکان افغانی برای این همه برای غیر تکراری برای این همه شعارهای تو خالی برای آوار خونه های پوشالی.
A lot of passion in that song. What's he singing about?
He's counting the reasons why Iranian people need to be in the street. For our mothers, for our sisters, for the baby cheetah that's dying because nobody's taking care of it, for the children who don't have, who can't go to school, for the streets, for the trees in the streets, because, and it's not, we talked about women in Iran a lot, but that's not all. The rate of poverty is more than 50% in Iran, and there's a lot of ecological issues. There are cities that have water issues. People have been arrested because they wanted to protect the forests and the animals, and there is lack of transparency. There is minorities that are being oppressed, religious minorities. If you are a Baha'i in Iran, you can't go to university, period. Like, if you are a Kurdish and Baluchi, you are oppressed in a different way. You cannot learn your mother tongue. You cannot publish in your mother tongue. So Islamic Republic has done stuff that brought a lot of people to their knees. And what Shervin is singing is kind of referring to all single one of those, and that's why a lot of people identify with that. The song has been sang in outside Iran in a lot of rallies with 60,000 people listening to it and all crying. And in Iran at nights, people would just like play it in the neighborhood loud because that's what they want to say. And he got a Grammy Award for it just last week because of what's happening in Iran, and I'm so grateful for that recognition. And I love the song, and if you play it, I'm gonna cry. But
okay, we have an English version too that is sung by a woman, Rana Mansour, and maybe we'll just hear just a little of that. You're listening to K-Squid.
For dancing in the alleys and the streets, for the thrill and the fear of getting caught kissing, for my sister, my brother, and you humanity, for all the times we tried to change their minds and stale beliefs, for the loss of pride, for poverty, for the dream of just a normal life for you and me, for all the children who were starving for a loaf of bread, for the greed of politics and all the lies they spread, for all the mass polluted air we breathe, for all the litter in the streets and all the dying trees, for all the animals who suffer from elimination, for all the cats and dogs who love us without no conditions, for all the tears that seem to never end, for all the images that keep on turning in our heads, for a simple smile to last a little while, for the future generations fighting for their time, for empty promises of heaven in the afterlife, for all the imprisonment of beautiful minds, for all the babies who were born and for the ones who died, for all the times you told the truth and all the times you lied, for all the speeches that we heard about a million times, for all the shacks and shelters that were sold to make a dime, for just a glimpse of a peaceful life, for the rising of the sun after an endless night, for all the pills we pop just to get some sleep, for all mankind in our country, for all the boys and girls who never knew equality, for woman, for life, liberty. For liberty. For liberty.
Farahi, sung by Rana Mansour there, and he just got a Grammy, the writer of that song. And you say he was arrested right after he got that Grammy.
Oh, sorry. No, he was arrested once the song was published. Not after the Grammy. My mistake. He was arrested once the song came out. And
what was the crime? Writing a song?
Writing a song.
Yeah, that's really wrong. You should never write a song about freedom or anything.
Exactly. And, you know, I mean, there are a couple of things here. You know, I mentioned earlier, singing in public is forbidden for women. I guess, you know, they don't want you to express your feelings because then you're going to, you know, express your opinions and then ask for other things and accountability and transparency and all that good stuff that we have in a democracy. So they arrested him. He's freed now, so I'm happy for that. But speaking of arrested people, after the protests, they arrested about 18,000 people. And some of them getting slanted with really harsh sentences. And there are 28 people, well, less than 28. There were 28 people who were in danger of execution. Among them is a rapper, Tumaj Salehi, who just thinks about social issues. And his job is just singing. And then they couldn't even tolerate that. But again, we go back. You know, first step to do an action is like saying you're gonna do it. And once you say it, maybe you take an action. And we are at the step in Iran that people are tired of, you know, tolerating this and came to street, mostly the young people. But that has a power, that has an energy and had a drive. And the Islamic Republic was really, really scared.
And rightfully so, because that's the future of the country. Those are the people who are going to be growing up into adults soon. And I guess they figure they just have nothing to lose because their future looks so dim. Do you want to call it a revolution or is it called an uprising? What do you like to use as a word?
Well, in Persian, we say enqilab, which is the revolution. So I think that's a revolution. And I've been waiting for it. I knew it's going to happen at some point. I had no doubt that this is not going to stay for long. When I left the country, I was like, well, I'm pretty sure in 50 years, this is not going to be the change. And now it's been 15 years and we are seeing all this. And that makes me very happy, very excited. I was
going to ask you about the psychology of this moment, because even if you're not right there watching people be oppressed, has got to be horrible emotionally for you and traumatic, right?
It is. It is so hard to watch, especially young women getting beaten by the security forces. It's hard to watch people getting killed, and it's everybody. They beat the young and the old and the middle-aged and the woman. There is no distinction there, and they have been. There is no official stat, obviously, but the unofficial stat is 481 people dead, and that includes 68 minors. And among them was a kid. There was a 9-year-old that was killed in Zahedan in Balochistan, which is another ethnic minority. And what the government does is they don't want the news to get out. So they have been scaring the families to not to talk about this. They tell to the families that we are not going to give the bodies to you, to try to convince them to silence. So this young kid that died, he was in a car with his parents, and they opened fire on the car, and the kids and the kid dies, the dad's injured, and the family kept the body in the house in a bed of ice instead of taking him to the morgue, because they are scared that the government will gonna snatch the body. And that's how they keep it. And it is heartbreaking to watch that. It is heartbreaking to read the news that CNN published the news that the Iranian government's using rape as a torture device on the prisoners. It's hard to hear that. And it's hard to hear about the people that are going to be executed. 4 have been executed in December and January. And those are really, really hard and tough.
And aren't those public? Like they're putting people up on a crane or something?
One of them was public.
And this is like the Handmaid's Tale.
Absolutely. That's, a lot of people look at it as like, oh, entertainment. It's like, no, that was our life. Like we were those little girls, that had to push to cover ourselves and had to submit to whatever that society imposed you as the role of a woman. And I could never get around that. I was like, you always question why women have to be go through this, and there is no good answer. And there's one ironic answer that they always said, oh, the hijab, the covering your hair is for protecting you. And now they are raping women in prisons. And that's so ironic and hard to watch.
If you just joined us, I'm speaking with Elnaz Sarbar. She is an activist, a mother, and a refugee, I guess you could say, from Iran. She'd probably be there if it was like, other countries. But we're talking about the uprising, the revolution, whatever you'd like to term it. It goes on. And we don't hear that much about it lately because of other things taking the top story of the news, whether it's State of the Union or the Turkish earthquake. All of these are big deals in the media, but this particular story is ongoing and evolving. And we are hearing more about it now, probably right now during this show, than we have in most of the media this week. My name's Rachel Ann Goodman. This is KSQD, your community radio station. And we're going to be talking with another person who's living here in Santa Cruz, but who's from Iran, about their experiences growing up under a repressive regime and what their view is of what's happening there with young people rising up against the repressive regime. One question I had for you is, well, I have so many questions. It's hard to know where to begin, but one point that was brought up was, where is the feminist movement in the United States on this? Why aren't they being louder about what's happening there? There's so much parallel, but it's way worse in Iran. So why haven't, you think, feminists in this country been louder about this issue? Or maybe I'm missing something. Maybe they have.
Yeah, it is sad, and I can see the same pattern about Afghanistan as well. That they are going through something really hard now. The women in Afghanistan cannot go to school, and I'm sorry, not women, just girls. They can go to elementary school, but that's it. No middle school, no higher education, no high school. A lot of them are banned from their jobs. And in terms of Iran, so I'm kind of hesitant to open this because as long as I start about talking, so there are two things. One is that what's happening in Iran is called by Islam. And there is the thing in the U.S. that a lot of people, when they start criticizing Islam, they're labeled with Islamophobia. And I think that's part of the reason maybe the feminist movement's kind of starting to not take this seriously, because you have to admit that the root of this, both in Afghanistan and Iran, and is Islam, and that's
fundamentalism.
Yeah,
not even Islam. It's people who interpret the Quran as telling them what they should do in the real world, and I bet there's not too many things in the Quran that tell people they have to kill people and torture them. I doubt that's what it says.
Well, I'm not torturing, but about women specifically, because I have read Quran. So I grew up in an Islamic country. We had to learn Quran from elementary school all the way to the high school and in the university. So I have 16 years of education that included Quran, and I learned Quran and I read Quran, and I know about women. There's specifically a verse that says, if your wife is not listening, is not going the right way. I'm trying to give you a translation of the thing. And talk to them first. If they don't listen, then ignore them in bed. And if they don't listen, then you can hit them. So this is actually in part of the Quran. And I know many people do not notice, and many people think see the reformed version of Islam in a sense that we might see by people who are practicing in a more democratic country. And there are people who practice it in a more, maybe they call it original way of Islam. And that's what I grew up with. And so here are the things. I usually say a lot of Christians do not say that people who did the Spanish Inquisition were not Christians, or the people who did witch hunting were not Christian. They were Christian of that time, but Christianity went through a reform and got to a way that's more, I say, compatible with human rights. And that's the path that Islam has taken in some countries, but not everywhere. And that's hard. That's a hard subject to talk about, because it raises a lot of questions and a lot of how do you talk about it without it making harder for some Muslims who are minorities in some countries, and without, I guess, making them upset, because but I feel that's an issue that needs to talk about. But as you said, the role of the feminists in all these, the Western feminists, could be more stronger and more powerful. And I feel, as somebody who came from the Middle East, that we need that sisterhood. And I think the women in Middle East can use the same freedoms and would want to use the same freedoms. And somebody like me never looked at that as Western values, right? For me, that was like a natural value. I should have the same rights as my brother.
It's a human right. It's a human right to be treated equally. Yeah. We have just about 5 minutes with you. We have a couple of clips here. Do you want to set them up?
Yes.
So this one is on Twitter. So Twitter hasn't been completely blocked. Would you like to introduce this clip?
Yeah. So a lot of people right now say the protest in Iran has gone down, and it's a little bit, we see less protest, but there is definitely a hope and a sense of that we are going forward in Iran. And one of the things that we're going to play for you is what happened in 1979 revolution that brought up the Islamists in Iran, and we're going to listen to it, and I can't tell what it is.
11/11/1401 ساعت 9:25 هستش. مرگ بر جمهوری اسلامی، مرگ بر خامنه ای.
I hear people yelling from rooftops. What are they saying?
Death to Khamenei, death to dictator. That's what they're saying. And this is the practice that started. It was, it's the middle of the night and people on the rooftops. It's dark. You can't tell who's yelling, and they're yelling, death to Khamenei, death to dictatorship. And this happened before in 1979, and it's happening again in Iran, just to keep this going.
Reminds me of when people were in the COVID and they were yelling or howling at the moon at 8 o'clock every night, so they didn't feel so alone. I imagine they're feeling a lot less alone when they hear other people answering in the dark. It's beautiful. Let's listen a few more minutes.
شعرهای شبانه محله جردن 16 بهمن.
Yeah, there's another one you sent, and we'll go out with that one.
Yes,
this one.
let's listen to this one.
What are we going to hear?
This is my favorite. This is the students in one of the universities in Sanandaj, a city in Kurdistan province, and they are chanting what became the slogan of this revolution, which is woman, life, freedom, zan, zendagi, azadi.
And in the video, they're waving their headscarves in the air.
It was so amazing to see these, and to see Iranian women burning their headscarves, waving their headscarf, dancing in the street. My heart beat and filled with joy and beat faster because I could see that. And that was my wish. Like, I love to go back to Tehran and be able to dance in the street.
Wouldn't that be a great moment? Well, let's keep following this story. And Elnaz, thank you so much for being my guest on the program. It's been great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Come back again. All right, we're going to go next to an interview with Erika Abrahamian. She is a yoga teacher and studying to be a mental health practitioner. And she left when she was a little bit younger than Elnaz. So we're going to hear her story coming up next. I'm Rachel Goodman. Welcome back to Talk of the Bay. I'm here with Erika Abrahamian, and she is here in the United States for quite some time, and we're going to talk about what's happening in Iran from her perspective. And I wanted to just first, Erika, to have you tell a little bit about your history, how you came to the U.S., what happened as a result. But let's turn back the time and imagine where you were before you came here from Iran. And then we'll talk about what it looks like, from that perspective now.
Yes. Thank you for kind of amplifying this issue. There's definitely need for that. I came to the States when I was 16 years old in the 90s. I was born in 1978 during martial law in Iran. And this was a few months after I was born, the revolution happened, where the Ayatollah Khomeini, he came in and he took over the country and changed it from a monarchy to a theocracy. And I grew up in Iran from the time I was 2 until the time I was 10. The Iran-Iraq War was going on. And that was a big part of my upbringing and my childhood. And my family tried to leave the country twice. So once when I was about 6 years old, we fled to Pakistan. And unfortunately, the person who had promised us visas to the United States disappeared with our money, so we had to go back. So that was also a very pivotal moment in my childhood.
And about being a child and perceiving what was happening, were you scared when you were leaving the country that you might be caught or turned back at that time? Were you aware of it at that age?
I was aware of it. I was really afraid for my father because he had avoided the draft. He had dodged the draft because he had a young child that he was raising and he didn't believe in the war. And I think it's also important to note that my father is from the Armenian minority in Iran. And Armenians are Christian Orthodox. And so this sort of holy war that was being fought between Iran and Iraq, he did not believe in it at all. And he had to flee on foot through the mountains. My mother and I could board an airplane and fly. So there was a period of time where my mother and I had arrived in Pakistan when we were waiting. And this was, before cell phones or anything like that. And we had no idea what was going on with my dad and when he was going to get there. So I had a lot of fears around that, around his safety and whether he was going to make it. I knew from a very young age the stakes of living under this regime. Everything, and especially in my family, the very particular private parts of our lives had to be kept a secret because my mother's Muslim and my father's from a Christian family. And when a Muslim woman marries somebody outside of the faith, it's a big no-no under the Sharia law. And so, that's a crime that can be punishable by death. So I knew from a very young age to have secrets, to have multiple stories, depending on who was asking. This concept of, kind of scanning the rooms and crowds for, whether something was going to get us in trouble or not was pretty hardwired in me from a very young age.
And as a girl growing up, what kind of awareness did you have of some of the impacts on girls' lives?
That's a good question. I've been thinking about that quite a bit. There's the sort of intellectual knowing of knowing when you're school aged and now you have to cover your body not because of something you believe or even your family believes, but because of something that the government believes. And getting home and taking off the headscarf first thing, especially on hot days, and just having this double life and having this very intense feeling of your body as being something that makes somebody else sin. That's how it was framed. And then there's the physical, embodied, somatic effects of that I'm still working through. The ways that our bodies were policed. It shows up even now.
Yeah. I have some students who are from that part of the world, and we're talking just about the rage that kind of was boiling inside them from being so brutally repressed physically and even by their own families in some cases, made to feel dirty when they had their periods and stuffed away in a room. And that's what this fight in Iran right now is really about, isn't it? It's about freedom of your bodily autonomy.
That's a big part of it. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely how it started. And rage is a really good word for this. The familial aspect of it, Iran is also, I just want to point out that it's not a monolith. So people are not a monolith. There are many different belief systems, and depending on whether you live in a city or not, you have different traditions and the different cultural values. And what happened with my parents' generation and the generation after, which would be my generation that grew up during the war, was that we either fled, like my family did, and many other Iranians who live in the diaspora all over the world, got out, or those who stayed learned how to survive within the confines of the system. Because if they fought it, they would end up in jail, they would be executed, and that's no way to survive. Now, this generation, which is the Gen Z of Iran, they have grown up, having complete access to the internet, knowing very well what life is like for their cousins who go and visit them during the summertime from the US or from Canada or wherever, knowing what things are like for other young people living abroad. And they have, like the Gen Z in the US, they have very different values. And it's part of what has happened in this movement is that it's brought up so much pride in what can happen And even under repression, to see these younger people just be completely brave and brilliant and smart and engaged, and that's been a big part of this process for those of us on the outside who are observing this. And at the same time, the immense guilt that we're feeling, that we didn't do this, that we didn't fight back. So there is this sense of somebody just mixed feeling, mixed emotion of both pride and inspiration and hope, and intense guilt and grief.
Yeah.
That for 43 years, we didn't do anything.
You were also facing the potential death sentence. So it's easy to imagine why people made the decisions they made to leave when they could. And we're watching that in Russia and other places that are repressed, that people are trying to get out and feeling that same feeling. I want to go back to your story because we haven't finished hearing how you did finally get to the United States.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We left, it was a few years after the war. So we left through Spain, and I won't go into the specific details of it just to protect the people who helped us. But yeah, we had some friends who assisted in the process of getting a visa to Spain. And when we got there, we asked for asylum and eventually came to the United States. Yeah.
And you were how old again?
I was 16.
Very formative time. What did it feel like when you first arrived here after having been in Iran for so long?
Overwhelming. I didn't speak English. I was kind of plopped into a high school in Northern California. There were no other Iranians that I knew of. There were no people of color in that high school at all. And there's, in hindsight now, I can look back and see the psychological impact of leaving at that age, and the way your world kind of cleaves into before and after, as it does with any sort of trauma. But specifically, I didn't choose to leave. My parents chose to leave. And at that age, leaving all of your friends and community and just, who you are. People know you as a particular person. And then with that goes culture and language and all of that. And then to come to a completely foreign place where nobody knows you, you don't speak the language, you don't know the first thing about how to begin to understand people around you. It definitely, for me, the way it manifested was to try to assimilate as fast as I could. And that's something that you get rewarded for here. And it's sad. There's grief with that as well, because it means I had to put away parts of myself that had been all of me up to that point.
Yeah.
So this whole kind of the revolution now happening in Iran, personally for me, has also brought up a lot of who I was. And I suspect for a lot of other people, I read Elnaz's piece, there is that sense of the past clashing with the present right now in so many different ways. Knowing what it's like to be stopped on the street and harassed for your headscarf, and then reading about women who are being killed for it now, or worse, raped as a result. But also having your own personal past come up in really intense ways.
And you've had a long journey of your career. You've been a major yoga teacher in the area for a long time. Some of our listeners may know you that way, Erika. But you are also studying to be a mental health practitioner, a therapist. And I imagine you're going to see people who you can help because of your experience who have gone through something similar, refugees, people fleeing wars. And there's a lot of people living here who come from somewhere else and had to leave that place.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not an accident that I'm doing what I'm doing.
Also heal thyself too, right? That's the process.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Discovery. Yeah. So we just heard from Elnaz and her story about dancing in the streets of Santa Cruz as kind of a brash act to show, that there's still this fire in people who want to be free, and reminding people that this is still going on. It's easy. And I teach a media course in media and social movements. And we talk about the media cycle being so fast for these movements around the world. We hear a lot about them and then we hear nothing. So what would you tell my students who are trying to understand how to stay current and care about these things happening? Is there a connection we can make, for example, between the removal of our own reproductive rights in this country and the inspiration being gathered from watching the video of people willing to risk their lives? What is that nexus of being a worldwide media world, but also so separate because of geography and politics?
Yeah. That's a big question. The first thing that comes up for me is that I believe, and I think some people who have written about this also believe, that, first of all, these movements, these social movements, are always connected. So in 2010, I believe, when the Green Movement happened in Iran in 2009, the following spring was the Arab Spring, right? And so this movement happening in Iran most likely got emboldened by Black Lives Matter. And so to understand that we are connected in these ways, that these global movements are actually global, that they're impacting each other, especially now with social media, this kind of call and response is happening a lot more quickly, right? And we can kind of trace it, and we can see the values that are showing up. And I think folks in America are waking up to the fact that we're not immune, right? We're not immune from rights being taken away. We're not immune from, big changes all of a sudden happening in systems and government, for better and worse. And that the awareness of these systems that we're all living under. And, again, I'll go back to what this generation is really inspiring me, both here and abroad and in Iran, is their willingness to look at these systems and say, this is not serving us, and that we want to change these systems. So I think staying connected to what's happening globally, to what's happening with, this is the only female-led revolution ever. And when I hear the deafening silence from Western feminists, I go a little bit, it's just, it doesn't make sense to me. Why are we not talking about this? Why is it that, the even these movements that have really high ideals are still not inclusive? They're still not understanding that we're not separated by borders, that our freedoms are interconnected. I have a lot of hope that the younger generation is moving in the right direction. And I hope that the older generation catches up.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, this seems like an unfair question to ask anyone. And I heard Amy Goodman ask it of one of her Iranian guests a few months ago. It's like, is it going to work this time? Are they going to prevail, or will this excessive crackdown of violence, continue? I think there was just news, was it yesterday, that, they're letting everybody out of jail. They're pardoning everybody. I don't know if that's true. They had a direct interview from NPR with one of the top people in the Iranian government. And there was a pretty
Yeah,
hard
that was
pushback. Did you hear that?
full of fake information, by the way. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. The Iranian government is very, very good at propaganda. That's their thing, as most authoritarian regimes are. And unfortunately, American media in particular eats it up and gives them space.
But the NPR reporter actually gave her an opportunity to refute almost everything he said with other facts. So I guess she was giving him a platform, but at the same time, she was knocking down every one of his claims with a lot of background and information and reporting. So maybe there was a benefit in just showing how far they're willing to go to lie to our media,
Right.
and that this journalist wasn't having it. It's like, wait a minute, that's not true. And he kept saying, oh yeah, that's all Western propaganda. So it's an info war in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I guess the question outside of that media exchange and propaganda exchange is, and it's impossible to tell from out here, but there are underground media sources and videos leaking out. How is it going now? Is it gaining traction? Are other sectors joining? What do you know about the current state of the Iranian revolution, if we can call it that?
I think we can call it a revolution, and people are asking that we legitimize it by calling it a revolution. I think it has changed form over the past couple of months, primarily because of the ruthlessness and the executions and the reports of almost 20,000 imprisoned with horrific conditions and torture, and I could go on. So that part, the street protests have quieted to a certain extent. They're not completely extinguished, but they have quieted to a certain extent. But strikes and economic efforts, like one of the things that people have started doing is taking all their money out of the banks. And to the point where the government, you'll go to the bank and they'll say, we have no more money. We have no cash to give you. So people are still finding avenues of keeping pressure on the government. People in the diaspora, especially in Europe, have been really lobbying hard so that foreign governments start putting more sanctions on the heads of states, and that's been working. So the regime is really squeezed, which is why they are making these concessions of letting out high-profile prisoners. And they're only letting out the high-profile prisoners because there's so much social media and foreign government pressure on them to do so. I think it's already started working. It's already succeeding. I've watched videos from the streets of Tehran. Many women are walking down the street without wearing the headscarf, and this wouldn't have happened 4 months ago, 5 months ago. It's going to be more incremental before the whole thing falls apart. But I believe that, these are the final months of this regime.
Well, I'm sure there'll be huge celebration when it actually falls, and it'll be interesting to see what our own government does. Iran's never been a very big pal of ours, but at this moment, I didn't hear anything about it in the State of the Union, so we'll see how we're supporting the very young people. We're talking children, who are out there protesting. We'll see how our government responds. If there's pressure, they might get more aware that the country cares about this issue. So I want to thank you for spending time with us talking about this. Is there anything you would like our listeners to do in response to hearing this interview?
I think if you are moved, if these stories and the courage of the people on the ground in Iran inspires you, put pressure on the American government to actually follow through. They have said things that have appeased the Iranian base, but we all know that a few steps away from action that will actually have impact. So put pressure on your representatives, tell them that this matters to you, that it's important to you. And if you are on social media, follow Iranian accounts, because you'll see there that the news cycle is still very much focused on what's going on the ground.
Wonderful advice. Thank you, Erika Abrahamian, for being our guest today on Talk of the Bay. We'll catch up with you another time, I hope.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right. Thanks for being here.